After watching the 50 Cent produced documentary centered on Sean Diddy Combs, a question that had quietly lingered in the background of hip-hop history returned with sharpened intensity. Did it fundamentally alter how the public interprets Suge Knight's role in the murders of Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G.? For many viewers, the answer was immediate and unsettling. Yes. The documentary did not introduce entirely new suspicions. Rather, it reorganized familiar fragments, old interviews, archived footage, lyrics once dismissed as bravado into a narrative that felt disturbingly coherent. And when fragments align, perception shifts. Time has a peculiar power. It erodes certainty while amplifying overlooked details. Lines that once sounded theatrical begin to feel calculated. Words delivered over heavy bass lines take on the weight of coded messages. A phrase like "I'll put $1 million on your head," once brushed aside as exaggerated street poetry, now reverberates differently, less as performance, more as potential intention. When revisited decades later, even casual laughter in interviews can feel strained. Body language becomes suspect, silences grow louder, and when members of Tupac's own family describe his death not as random violence but as a setup and a plot, those words land with renewed gravity. They do not merely express grief, they challenge the long-standing narrative that framed the tragedy as the inevitable outcome of a cultural rivalry spiraling out of control. For nearly 3 decades, the murders of Tupac and Biggie have existed in a space that feels suspended between criminal investigation and modern folklore. The East Coast-West Coast feud became one of the most sensationalized rivalries in music history, amplified by magazine covers, radio debates, and record labels eager to capitalize on tension. But behind the spectacle was a volatile environment, an ecosystem where pride, loyalty, ambition, and fear collided under the spotlight of global fame. Tupac and Biggie were not always enemies. They were once allies, exchanging admiration and sharing stages. Both were generational storytellers, reshaping hip-hop's emotional vocabulary and expanding its commercial reach. Their rise was meteoric, their influence undeniable. Their falling out, however, was magnified by forces far larger than personal disagreement. Media narratives sharpened the divide, diss tracks intensified it, industry politics deepened it. What began as tension evolved into something symbolic, a coastal standoff representing more than music. It became about identity, territory, and power. And then, in a haunting symmetry that still feels surreal, both men were murdered within 6 months of each other. Tupac was gunned down in Las Vegas in September 1996. Biggie was killed in Los Angeles in March 1997. 2 cities, 2 coasts, 2 artists at the height of their influence. The timing felt almost mythic, as though the rivalry itself demanded sacrifice. Yet despite the scale of the tragedy, justice remained elusive. Years passed with no convictions. The absence of closure allowed theories to multiply. Each new documentary offered a slightly different angle. Each retired detective seemed to carry a new revelation. Former associates gave interviews that blurred the line between confession and storytelling. Some accounts contradicted others, some seemed self-serving, but none delivered finality. The case became part of hip-hop's unresolved canon, an enduring mystery woven into the culture's collective memory. Then in 2023, a development disrupted the sense of permanence. Dwayne "Keefe D. Davis was indicted in connection with Tupac's murder. For the first time in decades, the case moved decisively forward in a courtroom rather than a documentary studio. The indictment did more than revive headlines, it forced a reevaluation of long-standing assumptions. Former Lap detective Greg Kading, who had previously investigated the case, made a striking claim. When the speculation is stripped away, the narrative narrows to 2 central figures, Keefe D. and Puffy. According to statements Keefe D. has made publicly over the years, there were conversations in which Diddy allegedly expressed a desire to see Tupac, and even Suge Knight eliminated. One such conversation reportedly occurred at Greenblatt's Deli on Sunset Boulevard, a location that feels almost mundane compared to the gravity of what was allegedly discussed. Tensions, fueled by diss tracks and escalating threats, had reportedly grown beyond competitive rivalry. Keefe D. claims that Diddy, frustrated and concerned about public humiliation and perceived danger, asked him to handle the problem and allegedly offered $1 million incentive. Whether that figure was literal or rhetorical remains contested, but Keefe D. has consistently asserted that both Tupac and Suge Knight were mentioned explicitly. If those allegations are accurate, they suggest orchestration rather than coincide. NCE, if they are exaggerated or false, they still demonstrate how deeply suspicion has embedded itself into the case's public narrative. Either way, the documentary's timing, combined with legal action, reshapes the conversation. It compels audiences to revisit the past not with nostalgia but with scrutiny. Lyrics are dissected, timelines are reconstructed, friendships are re-examined, motives are debated. The broader implication extends beyond individual guilt or innocence. It raises questions about the environment that allowed hostility to metastasize unchecked. Record labels profited from rivalry. Media outlets sensationalized conflict. Audiences consumed the drama in real time, often unaware of how fragile the situation had become. In hindsight, warning signs appear glaring. But in the mid-1990s, the culture was moving too fast, fueled by ego, ambition, and unprecedented commercial expansion. The documentary does not close the case. It does not deliver a final verdict. Instead, it reopens emotional wounds and reframes the power dynamics of that era. It reminds viewers that behind the mythology were human beings, young men navigating fame, loyalty, and threat under extraordinary pressure. And as legal proceedings continue and more testimony surfaces, the public is left confronting a difficult truth. History is not static, it evolves with evidence. It shifts with perspective, and sometimes, decades later, it demands to be reconsidered. The narrative becomes even more layered when Erich von Zip Martin steps into focus, a name that for years hovered at the edges of conversations but rarely occupied the center. Described as someone with close access to Diddy's inner circle, von Zip is alleged to have played a role in the movement of a weapon connected to the events surrounding Tupac's murder. While definitive legal conclusions remain contested, his presence in the broader timeline complicates what many once believed was a straightforward feud-turned-tragedy. The introduction of intermediaries suggests coordination rather than chaos, logistics rather than impulse. If a weapon changed hands, if money moved quietly through trusted associates, then the story shifts from spontaneous retaliation to something more deliberate. For Tupac's family, these possibilities are not abstract theories debated in podcasts or documentaries. They represent decades of unresolved grief. Each new name that surfaces reopens wounds that never fully healed. They have publicly questioned why certain individuals, particularly those rumored to have facilitated transfers of money or weapons, were not investigated with greater urgency. Why were some leads pursued aggressively while others appeared to fade? Why were relationships and proximity not scrutinized with equal intensity? When family members describe Tupac's death as a setup, their language carries the weight of lived loss. It is grief sharpened into suspicion, suspicion sharpened into advocacy. To them, the passage of time does not dull the pain, it intensifies the demand for clarity. The resurfacing of Kirk Burroughs' journals introduces a quieter but equally unsettling dimension, one rooted in documentation rather than recollection. Burroughs, a former bad boy executive, meticulously recorded business activities, including travel arrangements. Days before Tupac was shot during the Tyson fight weekend in Las Vegas, he documented that Diddy instructed him to arrange rental cars for a cross-country drive from New York to Las Vegas. The detail stands out precisely because of its impracticality. In an era when high-profile artists and executives frequently traveled by private jet, driving across the country seemed inefficient, even unnecessary. Yet the entries are specific, dates noted, routes mapped, costs itemized. Those handwritten logs, once routine administrative records, have since taken on investigative significance. In cold cases, anomalies matter. A deviation from standard behavior invites scrutiny. Why choose a method of travel that offers extended privacy and flexibility? Who occupied those vehicles? What might have been transported? Even if the explanation proves benign, the unusual nature of the request fuels questions. Investigators revisiting the timeline now parse not only who said what, but who went where and how. Gene Deal, Diddy's former head of security, adds further gravity by recounting the operational climate leading up to Biggie's murder. His reflections pull the story out of the realm of rumor and into the mechanics of protection budgets, staffing, threat assessments. According to Deal, security funding was reduced or abruptly discontinued during a volatile period when tensions between coasts were still active and unresolved. Biggie was in Los Angeles despite ongoing warnings that his presence there carried elevated risk. The rivalry may have been amplified by media, but the hostility behind it was real enough to warrant caution. On the night of March 8, 1997, attending a high-profile party, Biggie departed shortly after midnight. The atmosphere seemed celebratory, almost defiant, a signal that business would continue despite threats. Then at a red light, a car pulled alongside his SUV. Shots rang out in rapid succession. Chaos replaced confidence. Within hours, Christopher Wallace, 24 years old, father, son, lyrical architect of a generation, was pronounced dead. Deal has since reflected on how a combination of decisions, limited security presence, predictable travel routes, insufficient protective layering, may have left them dangerously exposed. In hindsight, operational lapses appear magnified. Choices that once seemed financially pragmatic or strategically neutral now carry tragic consequence. The question lingers, were these merely cost-saving measures and miscalculations, or did deeper tensions influence the degree of protection afforded? Compounding the unease were reports that Biggie had been considering separating from Bad Boy Records before his death. Discussions about publishing rights, financial transparency, and artistic autonomy had reportedly begun to surface. While no formal departure occurred, the possibility of transition introduced complexity into business relationships already strained by rivalry and external pressure. The industry, after all, is not driven solely by loyalty. It is shaped by leverage, contracts, and control. After Biggie's death, Diddy's trajectory accelerated dramatically. "I'll Be Missing You," a tribute framed as grief set to melody, became a global anthem. The song dominated charts worldwide, embedding loss into pop culture consciousness. His debut album achieved immense commercial success, solidifying his transformation from executive to superstar. In interviews years later, Diddy acknowledged that Biggie's death elevated his own profile, an observation intended perhaps as candid reflection but received by some as unsettling. The notion that tragedy could amplify opportunity, even indirectly, deepened public discomfort. None of these threads alone constitute definitive proof of orchestration or intent. Allegations remain allegations. Documentation invites interpretation. Testimony carries perspective and bias. Yet when viewed collectively, names surfacing repeatedly, unusual travel arrangements, alleged financial incentives, security withdrawals during volatile moments, business disputes quietly unfolding, a pattern of unresolved tension emerges. For fans, the story challenges nostalgia. For families, it sustains grief. For investigators, it demands renewed scrutiny. And for the broader culture, it raises a sobering truth. The mythology of hip-hop's golden era was built alongside real vulnerabilities, financial stakes, ego clashes, power dynamics, and decisions made under immense pressure. The deaths of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. were not just cultural losses. They were the violent collapse of two young men navigating fame within an industry that thrived on spectacle and rivalry. As new documents surface and past testimonies are re-examined under modern scrutiny, the narrative does not simplify, it expands. Each revelation reframes prior assumptions. Each resurfaced detail reshapes context. Decades later, the questions remain heavy, unresolved, and deeply human. Still, beneath the speculation and resurfaced testimonies, the legal landscape remains unforgivingly precise. Gene Deal has consistently drawn attention to a central fact that often gets lost in public discourse. Suspicion, even when widespread, is not the same as admissible proof. No publicly presented forensic evidence has definitively placed Keefe D at the exact second the trigger was pulled in Las Vegas. There is no widely disclosed DNA sample, no weapon recovered and traced in open court, no surveillance footage capturing the shooter's face. What exists instead are layered statements, some made years after the fact, alleged conversations, and circumstantial connections that prosecutors must now weave into a cohesive, evidence-based narrative. In the court of public opinion, patterns can feel persuasive. In a courtroom, they must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. That distinction explains why Keefe D's legal team opted for a bench trial rather than a jury trial. A jury carries collective emotion, memory of the 1990s, reverence for Tupac's cultural impact, and the weight of decades of unresolved grief. A judge, by contrast, is trained to filter out cultural mythology and focus narrowly on evidentiary thresholds. The strategy signals confidence in legal technicalities. It suggests the defense believes the prosecution's case may rely heavily on testimony and inference rather than hard transactional proof. The questions prosecutors face are clinical and exact. Was there a financial incentive? If so, where is the documented trail? Did money move through banks, shell entities, intermediaries? Was it withdrawn in cash? Who authorized the transaction? Who facilitated? Can timestamps, deposit slips, or communications definitively align with the timeline of the murder? Without a clear financial footprint, allegations of a bounty risk remaining rhetorical rather than prosecutable. And in high-profile cases, rhetoric does not secure convictions, documentation does. Greg Kading's reference to a 1997 informant adds another layer of complexity. According to Kading, that informant claimed Diddy hired members of the Southside Crips to target Tupac and Suge Knight, an account that allegedly mirrors what Keefe D would later describe publicly. When separate narratives echo one another across decades, it raises eyebrows. Consistency can signal credibility, but courts scrutinize motives. Was the informant seeking leniency? Was there incentive to embellish? Were statements recorded, corroborated, or independently verified? Similarity alone is not confirmation. It is with Orlando Anderson inside the MGM Grand. Surveillance cameras captured the fight. What they did not capture was the emotional residue that followed. Jamala recalls him returning to the hotel room charged with intensity. He paced, he changed clothes, he searched urgently for members of his crew. There was excitement in him, but also something sharper, an edge she could not quite define at the time. He insisted she and Kadada Jones remain inside. It seemed protective, almost instinctive. In hindsight, Jamala believes it was more than caution, it was intuition. She believes he sensed vulnerability closing in. The confrontation at the MGM had escalated publicly, pride had been challenged, reputations were at stake. In environments fueled by ego and retaliation, escalation can move quickly. Her most haunting memory, however, predates Las Vegas. Weeks earlier, she witnessed Tupac in a phone call so furious it unsettled her. The argument, tied to individuals within Death Row Records, revolved around ownership of his masters, control over his art, his publishing, his future earnings. Tupac's anger was visceral, his voice trembled, his veins stood out along his neck. This was not performative outrage for a studio microphone. It was the anger of someone recognizing the cost of contractual control. Jamala had never seen him so consumed by frustration, and what frightened her was not simply the volume of his rage, it was the magnitude of what he was confronting. He was challenging power structures, financial leverage, industry control. Tupac was beginning to understand that artistic success did not equal ownership. He was calculating his value, and according to Jamala, he was planning his exit. He wanted independence. He spoke of building ventures under his own name, of stepping into film more seriously, of creating business opportunities that would free him from dependency on any single label. He envisioned marriage, children, stability. The public saw rebellion, his family saw evolution. That duality is what makes the loss so piercing. Tupac was not static. He was not locked permanently in the image frozen on album covers. He was transitioning, moving from reactive energy to strategic planning, from confrontation to consolidation, from artist to architect of his own empire. The tragedy then extends beyond the bullets fired that night. It lies in the interruption of transformation. A life poised to pivot was cut short at the moment of recalibration. Legal proceedings may parse transactions and testimony. Detectives may align timelines and cross-reference statements. But within the quiet recollections of those who loved him, another truth endures. Tupac believed he was stepping into a future that would outgrow the chaos surrounding him. And that future never arrived. What makes this moment distinct from previous waves of speculation is the convergence of culture, law, and timing. For years, the murders of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. lived in a sea shaped by rumor and reinterpretation. The absence of convictions created room for myth-making. Competing documentaries, memoirs, retired detectives, former associates, and self-proclaimed insiders each offered fragments of a larger picture. But fragments, no matter how compelling, do not constitute closure. Now, with formal charges filed and a courtroom process unfolding, the narrative shifts from storytelling to scrutiny. The challenge before prosecutors is immense. Decades have passed, memories fade, witnesses age, some central figures are deceased, physical evidence degrades or was never preserved with the expectation that it would one day anchor historic prosecution. The legal standard remains uncompromising, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Circumstantial threads, no matter how numerous, must be woven into a coherent, verifiable chain. Financial trails must be documented, not implied. Alleged conversations must be corroborated, not merely repeated. Motive must be paired with action. The defense strategy is equally predictable and formidable. They will emphasize the inconsistencies in prior statements. They will highlight the evolving narratives of individuals who have told different versions of events over the years. They will question the credibility of informants whose cooperation may have been motivated by self-interest. They will remind the court that cultural consensus does not equal criminal liability. Suspicion, even widespread suspicion, is not evidence. At the same time, the cultural dimension cannot be separated from the legal one. Tupac and Biggie were not anonymous victims. They were global icons whose deaths reshaped hip-hop's trajectory. Their murders intensified a coastal rivalry that had already escalated through diss tracks, media sensationalism, and public confrontations. The industry's competitive theatrics blurred into genuine hostility. Security decisions, travel arrangements, affiliations, and perceived alliances all carried heightened risk. When violence erupted, it felt like the inevitable climax of a conflict that had been building in plain sight. The business dynamics add another layer. Both artists were navigating contracts, publishing rights, and ambitions beyond their existing labels. Control over masters, distribution leverage, and branding power were not minor details. They were the foundation of generational wealth and influence. Friction over ownership can escalate quickly in an environment already fueled by ego and public rivalry. When artists begin signaling independence, questioning leadership, or planning exits, relationships strain. In hindsight, those tensions appear more consequential than they may have seemed at the time. There's also the uncomfortable question of benefit. Whenever tragedy intersects with commerce, observers inevitably ask who gained from the aftermath. Following Biggie's death, careers shifted, visibility increased, tributes generated global revenue, entire catalogs experienced renewed demand. While success after loss does not equate to culpability, the optics can shape public perception. In high-profile cases, perception often hardens into narrative long before a jury hears testimony. Meanwhile, families continue to carry the human cost. For them, the debate is not theoretical, it is personal. Every resurfaced interview reopens wounds, every new allegation replays trauma. Grief, when unresolved by justice, evolves into vigilance. They listen differently to old songs, they interpret archived footage with sharper awareness. They weigh each revelation not as gossip, but as potential clarity about the final days of someone they loved. Freddie P's comment about restless souls underscores that emotional dimension. It speaks to a broader truth about unresolved violence. It lingers culturally. Murals, anniversary concerts, streaming numbers, none of these substitute for definitive accountability. Hip-hop matured under the shadow of those losses. Artists who followed inherited both the creative blueprint and the cautionary tale. The industry professionalized security. Rivalries became more calculated. Public feuds learned from the consequences of unrestrained escalation. As the trial approaches, the global audience will dissect every development in real time. Social media amplifies testimony instantly. Legal analysts will parse language. Former associates may resurface with commentary. The risk, however, is conflating narrative momentum with evidentiary strength. The courtroom operates at a slower, stricter pace than public opinion. Judges evaluate admissibility. They separate hearsay from substantiated fact. They assess whether a financial transfer can be proven, whether an agreement can be documented, whether intent can be established through more than implication. Nearly 3 decades after gunfire echoed through Las Vegas and Los Angeles, the passage of time has not dulled the urgency of the questions. Instead, time has sharpened them. What once felt like a tragic chapter in a volatile era now feels like unfinished business. The mythology surrounding the East Coast-West Coast conflict is giving way to a renewed demand for specifics. Who authorized what? Who executed which action? Who knew? Who remained silent? Ultimately, the significance of this moment extends beyond individual accountability. It reflects how culture grapples with unresolved history. Hip-hop is no longer a niche genre battling for mainstream respect. It is a dominant global force, an economic engine, a cultural archive. Its foundational tragedies deserve the same rigorous examination afforded to any other historical turning point. Whether the trial delivers convictions, acquittals, or further ambiguity, it will reshape the narrative. It will either substantiate long-held suspicions or dismantle them under evidentiary pressure. It may provide clarity, or it may expose how deeply entrenched myth can become when justice is delayed. What remains certain is this: the murders of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. are not fading into nostalgia. They continue to influence discourse, shape reputations, and define an era. The courtroom now becomes the arena where decades of speculation confront the discipline of law. And as testimony unfolds, the world will watch not only for answers, but for a sense, however partial, that one of music history's most enduring mysteries is finally being addressed with the seriousness it has always demanded.